Hey everybody, it's Ammon at Blue Forest Studios. Welcome to the definitive guide to animation styles. I am the creative director at Blue Forest Studios. I've been doing that for 10 years. And in that time, I've done a lot of work in the animation space. Sometimes when you're telling a brand story, which is what we focus on, animation is the best tool to do that. It's a different type of emotional impact than is possible with live action. Somehow when you're doing a different frame rate and a different character style and different colors that don't really exist in the real world, that evokes a different response. It can also be a really useful tool if you've got a complicated message, a complicated piece of software or system.
I don't get it.
Animation can be a way of simplifying that message and using visuals to show that all in a way that you really can't do with live action. So the challenge comes when you start talking to a client or another coworker trying to develop styles. There's so many styles and there's no uniform language. It gets really tricky to communicate clearly. This guide will help kind of set a framework, set a glossary of terms to begin speaking more intelligently about the different animation styles and put your energy more towards the creativity. So as I began to look at all the different categories and some of the different terms that were being used, I was able to identify around 21 distinct styles, and I've categorized those into 4 different categories. 2D digital, there's 3D digital, there's analog. The 4th category is some hybrid between any of those other styles. Okay, you excited? Let's dive into the 2D digital styles. Top of the list is what I call vector style animation. It's the most common. At least 50% or more of our animations are in this style. I would call this an iconic style. You're using Illustrator or a program like that to create vector shapes, so they're very clean edges, rounded lines, distinguished lines. People pick this style because it's professional. It can be professional and clean, and most businesses are trying to present a professional, clean image of themselves. So the next on the list is pretty common. We do a lot of it at least, what I call hand-drawn style. But rather than the artist creating the assets in Illustrator with vector-based shapes, they're actually hand-drawing the assets. Maybe they're in Photoshop or their favorite art tool using digital brushes, less polish, less smooth lines, texture, all that you may want.
I want to go to there.
Your eye, when it comes to things that are uneven and jagged, it spends more time on those. For that reason, it can just put the brain in a different space. The next style on the list is cartoon. Saturday morning cartoons when you were growing up watching DuckTales or Hanna-Barbera. It's all character-based, and those characters are going to move in funny ways. They're going to do silly things. They're going to run out over a cliff and hang there for a second, and when they fall, their body will stretch and there'll be a poof of smoke. Occasionally, that may be the appropriate style. You may be selling to children. You may be wanting to have a really silly, funny look. Maybe you're doing a parody of something. All those tropes and all of that vernacular would be part of that. And kinetic typography is the next one.
Everybody shut up.
I think kinetic typography means the text comes on and moves in a very kinetic way. It's physical, and one word pushes out another. Usually there's one word at a time that comes in and one line that pushes out. The text can grow or have figures on it. The typography can have backgrounds that match and even other objects that come in to enhance that typography.
Enhance.
But if your typography is not the center stage of every frame, you may be getting into more motion graphics or, vector style graphics. The next one on the list is animated infographic. So 10 years ago, you probably recall this craze, infographics were all the rage.
It's so hot right now.
It was a way of taking charts and graphics about some dense informational topic and creating kind of a one-sheet PDF that kind of took you through a visual journey. And then, of course, the next logical step in that was to take that thing that had really been in the graphic designer space and say, well, what if we animated that? So it's kind of like a kinetic typography, but for charts and callouts. So the next style is called digital cutouts. You're taking artwork, could be other people's artwork, It could be your own artwork, but you're actually kind of printing it or simulating like you're printing it, scanning it in digitally, cutting it out, and creating a digital collage. It can be very retro, it can be very creative, and you may even go so far as to make it feel like it looks like paper by adding drop shadows and curls and bends. This can be a very psychedelic look depending on how you do it. The next style is rotoscoping. This is actually a technique that's been around for a long time. You've got some image, it could be a video, and you want to create an animated version of that. You're going to take those actual images frame by frame, you're going to trace over them. You're picking your own colors, you're picking the level of detail, you're picking your brushes. You could do that 50 years ago easily, even from the Star Wars effect of a lightsaber. That's rotoscoping. The next style is called isometric. This one's very interesting. I heard of the style, I saw the style, and you've seen it probably in video games if you play video games. Isometric projection was actually a mathematical formula that technical drawers would use to take a 3D object and be able to represent it on a 2D plane, which would be a piece of paper or a computer screen. It's very distinct. It kind of looks like a 3/4 view of something. There are plugins that you can get for After Effects and other programs that will take an object and make it isometric. All right, now we're gonna get into the 3D styles. First one on the 3D world, I'll call 2.5D. Taking a photograph and then breaking it up into different layers based on the photo having a foreground, midground, background, and doing animations. There's some advanced tools nowadays that make that a lot easier than it used to be, but it's all 2D objects that you're taking and putting kind of in a 3D space without fully going 3D. So the next style, I think probably the most common, is photorealistic 3D. So if you've got a real tangible product and you want to do some crazy stuff with it, you may create a photorealistic render of your product. If there's any other objects in the frame or textures or backgrounds, you're going to want to try and make those photorealistic. You're going to be working in programs like Maya or 3D Studio Max or Cinema 4D. Now that can be very time consuming. It's just a lot of work. The next style we'll talk about is called cell shading. Now, there's probably other names for this that I don't have yet.
Say my name.
The idea of taking 3D objects, 3D models, and animations, and you're doing the modeling and things like that, your textures and your lighting, you're simplifying down as much as possible. So instead of the light wrapping around with a gradient, like you see on my face here, you might have 2 or 3 sections of here's the brightest, here's the mid, and here's the shadow. So it looks kind of like a cartoon style animation. A lot of video games do that. Zelda's Wind Waker was an example, an early one where they just went to that stylized approach, and it's really fun and it has a cool feel. The next style we'll talk about is called simplified geometric, very commonly referred to as low poly. When you create a model, it's made up of polygons. Everything's straight lines, but if you get enough straight lines, then it starts to look curved. If you crank that poly count way down, it has a very distinct style, and it's an interesting look, and it's very quick to render, it's stylized. There are plugins that do this as well. The next style in 3D is called digital claymation. Now you probably know what claymation is without me having to explain it, although in the next section we'll talk about claymation.
We'll discuss it later.
Rather than doing claymation and moving clay around and doing stop motion basically, you can take 3D models and apply textures that look a lot like clay and light it like clay, and it looks like claymation without having to move clay around, which I don't have any experience in either of those mediums. I don't know which is faster, but I've certainly seen a lot that are clearly 3D, but they're trying to look like clay. Okay, so let's get into analog styles, our third category. Now we're kind of going back in time.
Back to the future!
Everything was analog before digital came along. But we're also, I think, becoming more modern because a lot of people are getting tired of digital and they want to go back to analog.
Back to the future!
Just like people are buying vinyl again. They want that authentic feel, and it can be really effective for certain projects. So let's go through some of the styles. I want to start with my pet peeve one, which is whiteboard videos. And this is where I might get into a little bit of a rant. Okay.
Okay, buddy, one rant at a time.
Whiteboard videos can be very good for if you've got a complicated topic, if you want to be very authentic, if you want to kind of be forced into simplicity because all you have is a whiteboard marker or whatever, 4 colors, and whatever you can draw with that, which is pretty limited. It's a very clumsy art form. But if you want a really good whiteboard video, the ones that you see that get millions of views, somebody has spent many, many hours planning that. In other forms, you're doing all that work after the fact, but in this case, you want to do it before. You know, a really good whiteboard video isn't going to cost any less than a 2D vector style. And, you know, it could, but it really shouldn't if you want them both to be good videos. What really complicates it is soon after the big craze of whiteboard videos, there were these plugins you would get for After Effects, and they would take a picture of a hand, and it was just one angle, and it would automatically follow that path of that drawing you put in. For me, it was very obvious that this is fake. You're not really filming something. That hand never moves like a real hand. It never changes angle. It just is very digital and very fake. And the drawings, frankly, were pretty crappy. If you're trying to convey authenticity, get a real camera, set it up, plan out your visuals, draw out a really compelling visual, and you've got a whiteboard video. We've done a lot of different animations that our clients probably call whiteboard videos. We would have a real camera and someone's drawing, but it's not a whiteboard. And they're doing drawings, and we can see their real hand and we see it pull out. And then we're taking and animating additional to that. I think when done right, it can be a really good format. And I like it. I just don't like when clients expect it to be $500 and to be done in 2 days when it takes just as long and costs just as much as our other animations, because we're going to do it right, we're going to script it right, we're going to plan it right, we're going to film it right, and it ends up taking us 70 hours.
What could it cost? $10?
The next analog style is claymation. Again, this has been around for many, many years, back to the California Raisins, Gumby, Wallace and Gromit. It's taking clay and forming it into what shape you want, and then taking a stills camera and doing stop motion, which means take a picture, then move your object, take another picture, and then later you go in and stitch it all together. It's a very physical, hands-on feel and look, and it's very time consuming. The next analog style I'm going to call traditional cutout. This kind of relates to the digital cutout we talked about earlier. Traditional cutout meaning you're doing a collage, you're cutting out pictures from a magazine or whatever, construction, or you can cut out shapes from construction paper, and you're moving it around with sticks or strings or even stop motion. I really like this style. I like seeing the texture of the paper. I like seeing the shadows that it casts. I'll even, if I've done this style, take the paper and that I've cut out and bend it a little bit so I know it's going to lift off from the surface. I'll light it from the side so that you can see the drop shadow. So that can have a very interesting, compelling look to it if you've done it right. Next, we have stop motion. It's the same thing we just talked about, but just to reiterate, you're taking some kind of object and you're taking a picture, you're creating a scene, taking a picture, moving it. And it's interesting because you can do things, again, in this style that you can't do otherwise. You could have your character start walking and then start walking up the wall and flip upside down and just have things, and your imagination is the limit here. Anything you can think of, and it has a very kind of organic feel to it. So the last style I'll talk about is a variation on stop motion, which I'll call artistic stop motion. And you'll see a couple examples here, but basically you're taking the stop motion technique, and rather than moving objects around, you're actually drawing something. It could be painting, and you paint a little bit, take a picture, paint a little bit more. So the viewer gets to see this painting unfold in front of them in a kind of a time-lapse sort of a way. I've seen some really creative things done with that. And so I wanted to include that as its own unique style. Let's get into the last category, which is hybrid styles. Now, you can take any of the styles we've already talked about, smash them together, and come up with a hybrid style. That's what creativity is all about. That's, in my view, the definition of creativity is take two things that don't belong together, smash them together, and sometimes it works and sometimes it's a disaster. When it works, it's a beautiful thing. One, you'll see this a lot, is live action mixed with animation. Something about seeing a real person and then you adding fantastical images around them, swirling around, or having them interact. There's some times where that is just the right mix of two different styles for your message. Any animation style that we've talked about, almost any of them, you could composite using green screen or some other compositing technique. That can be very interesting. This is another combo. It's more of a technicality, but kinetic typography mixed with vector 2D graphics. And that's really when you get into kinetic typography, but you're really embellishing it so much and you're bringing in other iconic elements that it's not really kinetic typography anymore. There's a lot of other stuff going on. So I would call that kinetic typography mixed with 2D animation or vector 2D animation or motion graphics. The last hybrid style I'll talk about would be 2D mixed with 3D. And this might seem a little confusing at first because how do you do that?
How do you do that?
It also can be confusing because you can see it happening right in front of your eyes and not really realize that it's happening. And that has to do with the plasticity of these different styles. In other words, you could do a 2D style that's very traditional looking, it has a certain color palette, and then you could do a 3D animation and use a cell shading technique on it. So it looks almost like a 2D animation, but it's doing things, it's moving in ways that 2D simply can't do. Again, you'll see that a lot. Sometimes it's very obvious, other times it's not. Two more things I want to talk about that aren't necessarily styles in and of themselves, but they're techniques. And they're techniques because they can be used in multiple different styles. But they're also complicated enough that I think they're worth mentioning. Number one is character animation, which again, you could use that in 2D, you can use it in 3D, you can use it in cartoon style, a bunch of different styles. But when talking about digital character animation, I mean, I think you could dedicate your whole career to just that. Character creation, character design, character rigging, character animation, walk cycles, facial expressions, speaking, all those things, they really take years to even become proficient at. And when you get it wrong, people know what the human face looks like. And when it looks weird in an animation, you get into this uncanny valley of, that's off-putting. If you like that kind of work and want to get really good at it and learn how to do it in different mediums and different plugins, I think that's worthwhile. There's demand for that skill. The next technique I'll talk about is rotoscoping, which we had categorized as its own style because you can do a whole video in rotoscoping, but it's also a technique that can be used as a hybrid within other techniques. You might have one style of animation and there's just one object that you're rotoscoping for some reason. It's a difficult skill. It's specialized. I mean, there are artists in Hollywood that's all they do is rotoscope.
Like all day, every day.
And they're digitally painting frame by frame. You know, they might be painting a boom mic out of a shot or a green screen or a reflection. And that's also rotoscoping. Anytime you're painting frame by frame, no matter what it is, that's technically called rotoscoping. And it's a technique you could learn really in depth. The best way to learn more about animation styles is to look around you for things that inspire you and to get organized. And I'll give you a few resources that I look to. Motionographer is a website that has some of the best animations in the world, especially corporate animations. The Vimeo Animation Awards, the National Addy Awards, there's usually some kind of animation. And if you're looking for a really high-end commercial work with animation, that's a great source to look at. Look for it in your daily life. If you see an animation, a really cool 15-second commercial, go look for it. Have a document. and write those down. Find a link to it. So a year from now, when you're in a creative rut, you don't know what style to do next for your next project, you can spend an hour, watch through all those videos, and I guarantee you your juices will be flowing by the end of that.
Baby, you got a stew going.
It'll be absolutely invaluable resource for you to have an inspiration document. That was your definitive guide to animation styles. I hope it was useful to you. We want this to be a useful resource. We're open to your comments for improving it, expanding it. Hope you share it with your friends. We hope you link to it. Hit us up. Let us know how we can improve it. Thanks for watching.